What do you want to see him have?
You got to have a players coach for LeBron. I played for, Eric Spoelstra was the assistant coach in Miami. I know he's a players coach. He's a very big part of Dwayne Wade's development, Dwayne being the player that he is now. So it was an easy transition for him to be able to relate to LeBron. And then obviously T. Lue. You know the relationship that LeBron had with T. Lue. And I just think you cannot get I don't think a Rick Carlisle type of coach is what LeBron is looking for. I think he's looking for more of a players coach where he's going to have a lot of input on what they're running, the offense they're going to be able to run, have a little bit more control in the locker room. And I think if you go out and get a big-name coach, that's not what LeBron is used to or he can relate to.
So I think that, listen, the Rick Carlisle thing's not going to happen, but let's stay here for a minute in regards to what you said. I think you are mostly correct. Where I will disagree is I think there are a select few coaches that aren't what you would call players coaches that LeBron would be 100% cool with.
Pop.
And Carlisle, Pop, Doc Rivers, guys that are so well established, champions in their own right, that they would have the immediate respect and attention of LeBron to be able to say, this is how we should do things. What you can't be is the David Blatt method, which is a non-players coach unproven, this is how we're going to do things, because why would I listen to you when you haven't shown me you know what you're doing?
The NBA is different than the NFL, but my experience has been that, especially when players get older, like later in my career, I was willing to go to St. Louis with Mike Martz, greatest show on turf. I would have loved to play for someone like Belichick. They weren't New England then, because of a great coach. He takes so much pressure off a really smart player. There's so many other things that their system accounts for that you don't have to account for. So if you want a players coach and you have been and you're one of these great players and you have a high basketball IQ or football IQ, there's more work for you. You got more work every day that you have to do around the locker room and things like that. I just believe the way LeBron is right now, if he had the opportunity to coach, be coached by someone who he thought was special as far as basketball, I think he would be open for that. I don't think they have a whole bunch of options. So a lot of times when you don't have a whole bunch of options, what do you go to? You go to something that's familiar. You trust that more compared to trying something that's totally new. And that's where I believe that Ty Lue falls in that class as far as the Lakers hiring him. I believe he will be the next coach for the Lakers.
Hopefully he does. T. Lue's a good friend of mine, so I would love for T. Lue to get that opportunity. I think he's top on the list, but I think you got to put a couple other guys in that short list. I think Jason Kidd is another guy that could possibly get that job. I like Mark Jackson coming out the booth to be possibly one of the guys, too. He's a players coach, too, as well. But I played for Doc Rivers. Doc Rivers is the ideal players coach. He's a guy that you can definitely relate to. He does very well with players. He did a terrific job with Paul, Ray, and Kevin as far as nursing their bodies and making sure that they were healthy at the end of the year. So that he would have been like a perfect coach. Rick Carlisle I don't know very well for me to pose a real strong opinion on him, but I just think for him to go through the dog years of Dallas, he's not going to give that up now. Now you got a couple stars.
Luka.
Right. Yeah.
I know, that's why I say you got a couple players now.
Because you got players, you have a first-class organization. There is no questions about ownership. Do they know what they're doing? No questions about the front office. Like, Dallas is a great job.
I'm signed till 2023.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the other part of it. The Lakers.
That's all guaranteed, too. Now.
And what the Lakers are going to do when they bring up these coaches that are under contract, you know how you get a coach that's under contract? He has to want to go there. The team has to be willing to let him go. But you got to trade something for him.
Yeah.
That draft pick is spoken for. It's supposed to be included in an Anthony Davis trade, not in a Rick Carlisle trade. And Mark Cuban is not going to be outbid for his coach. And so I would really like to know where the Carlisle rumor came from. I tried to find out yesterday. I couldn't. I got stonewalled at every turn. Because it really, to me, makes as much sense as floating Pop out there.
Well, people could be reaching. I think, obviously, I'm a little biased, but I think T. Lue, if you really think about the ingredients that having LeBron's familiar with him, he knows how to coach LeBron. He knows how to deal with him on a day-to-day basis. If you look at when they won the championship, he made some great moves. The insertion of Dante Jones, Richard Jefferson. He's not scared to make big moves come playoff time. He's prepared for this moment, and I'm pretty sure he's a better coach now, even after having those years with LeBron.
Yeah, you make some great examples of Ty Lue. The adjustments that he made to give an undermanned Cleveland a chance in those games. When the system that he put in with LeBron, too, I have a lot of respect for that because they were not the most talented in most series that they went into absent of LeBron James.
Antoine, there's a report out there, switching gears just a little bit, that the Lakers are concerned about LeBron's injury. Moving forward, I mean, that he maybe about his health, but based on the injury and the time that he spent off, how concerned should this team be about LeBron James?
I mean, it's year 16 going to 17. You should be very concerned. Obviously, his health is very important. You got a 3-year window that you're trying to bring a championship back to L.A. Obviously, right now they're not making the playoffs, so you try to figure out not to play him the rest of the year, so you don't want anything to linger into the summer. I think this is going to be the first time where LeBron gets a chance to really work on his body and decide what way he wants to play at, what type of conditioning he wants to be in. He's got a couple extra months now to figure that out. He doesn't have to rush his process as far as in the summertime, as far as getting in shape. He gets to take his time, gets his hunger back. Believe me, watching the first round of the playoffs, the second round, he will be sitting there. He will be upset. This is 13 years this guy's been in the playoffs. This guy's won 8 straight finals. He will be upset. He'll be rejuvenated. So I think this will be great for him. I think you have to I think shutting them down is not the wrong thing to do.
We can't disregard the concern. Guy never been hurt. So we don't know how his body's going to respond to being hurt. We also don't, I think it'll be good, all this extra time off. We also know how his body's going to respond to an extra 2 months off that he hasn't had since he's been an adult, basically.
Right. I think that reaction is more positive. Like, there's only people are crazy if they think that time off is a negative. I think that's a positive.
I think it's a positive as well. I just think he doesn't know the most productive way to use that time. Because that's the other part of it. Like, he has had a method as far as what I do June 20th until the beginning of the season. Now that's going to start in 2 weeks from today is when his season ends, and maybe earlier. But the other element is people should know, LeBron, since his post-rookie year, the 3 worst years of his career, first year in Miami, first year back in Cleveland, first year with the Lakers. Now, maybe this year is the beginning of the decline of LeBron, or maybe it's also that he's never been as good his first year in a new place as he was in the years that follow.
It's a tough one because you don't know which OKC team you're going to get. You don't know which Paul George you're going to get. Paul George needs to be an MVP candidate, not an all-star.
Yeah.
You know, he needs to play at the level that he was playing at early in the season where we thought he was really in that conversation of being the MVP. But I think in the 7th spot right now is a good spot for them to be in. I think they will give the Denver Nuggets everything they can handle. I think they will have a legitimate opportunity to beat the Nuggets. They need to stay away from Golden State. They would need to get going in the playoffs and, you know, get a series under their belt before you want to go against a Golden State or Houston Rockets type team. So I think if they can stay in the 7th spot, and I know it's tough sometimes when you get to this point to try to pick your opponent because obviously the West is so bunched up.
It's impossible right now in the West, more so this year than any year I can remember.
To pick your opponent,
1-2 is a half-game separation. 3-4 is a half-game separation, and 5, 6, 7, 8 is 2 games of separation. So even if you could say, even if they could lock in the 7th spot, they don't know if that's going to be Denver or Golden State. Like, and so I know Golden State ended up pulling away last night. That was a 1-point game in the 4th quarter against Memphis, like with a fully healthy Golden State team. So it's going to be, there's going to be a lot of just final day of the season, how it falls, what team you get in the first round. Are you on Golden State's side of the bracket or the other side of the bracket? So if you set that part of it aside, the question is, what's the best version of the Oklahoma City Thunder? And the best version of the Oklahoma City Thunder, in my mind, is a team that has been defending at this level all year, continues to defend at this level, but you get the Paul George you were seeing in January combined with an under-control Russell Westbrook. Because I had brought up, hey, maybe if Russ, he was shooting well post-All-Star break for 8, 9 games, it's a mirage. Like, he's not going to continue any good range shooting from Russ is going to be short-term gains, not long-term. So it's going to have to be Paul George being dominant, as you mentioned, and a team that uses Nerlens Noel, uses Dennis Schroeder, and can suffocate you defensively with their first or second unit.
They got a couple issues. The biggest issue is in the playoffs, they're going to be the worst shooting team in the playoffs. You know, especially shooting from range. They are challenged as far as that. Can you win in this new NBA where the referees, so they're going to need some help. They're going to, last year in the playoffs, we didn't necessarily have the freedom of movement emphasis that we had this year. But last year in the playoffs, man, things got a little more physical than they were during the regular season. are the referees in the NBA going to allow them, especially if it's Golden State, to handcuff them in that first series? I believe the best matchup is Golden State, that they could try to rough them up. I don't believe the matchup with Denver is a good matchup for them. Can the worst shooting team in the playoffs, can they really make a mark in the playoffs? Because you don't know which team you're going to see. And as far as Paul George, not to make an excuse for him, but he's really struggled with his shoulder injury. So he struggled shooting the basketball. He hit that typical wall that we see with 10 to 15 games left. We thought James Harden was going to hit, but we got James Harden dropping 50, dropping 60, showing us a video after the game. But Paul George, he has, not to make an excuse, since he was in that MVP conversation, he's run into a couple things from a shoulder standpoint that have really hampered his game.
And let me add to that. My question mark with the Thunder is the others. Terrence Ferguson, do I trust him?
Jeremy Grant.
Yeah, Jeremy Grant, do I trust him? Then you get, so those guys have to be good. Markieff Morris, are you going to implement him into the rotation where you can get something out of him? We know he can play, he can play well come playoff time. I worry about those guys because I believe that Westbrook can win a game by himself. He have one of those moments. Paul George can win a game by himself. So they're a team, if they fall 6, 7, 8, the top 3 teams don't want to play them in the first round. They're going to be a very tough out. Do I think they can make some noise and make a deep run? No. Westbrook has been too inconsistent for me offensively. I worry about his free throw shooting, only shooting 65% from the line.
I don't know what has happened to Russ.
Yeah.
Listen, Russ.
Him and LeBron drinking the same thing. Because of the top players in the league, those are the only two that we have seen that aren't 7-footers.
That aren't shooting at least 70%. But here's the thing I don't get. LeBron was never 80%, right? LeBron was a 76% guy that somehow has gone to 67%, and it doesn't make sense. Russ, his MVP year was north of 80. For his career prior to last year was always around 78 to 82%. To all of a sudden be at 65%. It's such a bizarre thing. The LeBron thing makes a little more sense because he was never great at it. Russ was a really reliable free throw shooter at one point in time.
It becomes mental. I was a bad free throw shooter in my career, and I made it when it counted in the playoffs, but during the season, I think my career was like 60%.
You could never get your routine either. Sometimes you was off the line, sometimes you was on the line, sometimes you
I'm impressed that you knew that. I'm impressed that you knew that.
Man, you need to go somewhere.
So I think it's mental.
Have a consistent routine.
Because when I got traded to Dallas, they had a shooting coach, and he put me through this whole routine. He threw me all the way off. I shot 50. Yeah. He threw me. I haven't been the same since then. I was never the same. I blame the shooting coach in Dallas for this. But I just think it's mental, though, for LeBron and Westbrook. I think once you get in those bad ruts and you start missing free throws, especially when the game on the line and it counts and your teammate depends on you and you got to answer those tough questions at the end of the night because you didn't make your free throws, I think it becomes more mental.
But it goes towards everything. Every time we have discussion about the Thunder, it's how inconsistent they are. Between Russ and his shooting, the team playing, them having to go on a 24 run to beat the Pacers, that's why you don't know which team is going to show up. They're so inconsistent.
Well, and listen, we've done a lot of vacillating on this team throughout the year, but at one point in time, you asked the question, man, if the Thunder climb up to the 1 line, could Paul George be the MVP? That was the peak of their season. They were, I think, 3.5 games out of first in the West. Paul George playing the best basketball of his life. We were talking about what a great move it was for him to stay. Now we're 6 weeks later, and it's like, are they going to be one and done in the playoffs again? Is it 2 years of Russ and Paul George? That's how that
One of our biggest problems is what we saw, because we saw Paul George, we saw him dominant, we saw Russ take that second seat. But our other problem is our friend Vinny, who sat here, he was like, I talked to Golden State Warriors, and they are afraid of OKC, more so than Houston. And it was like, well, man, he got that from the Warriors. So we include that in the show. So that's a part of it.
Yeah. Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from First Things First, or go watch a few segments from our other shows on FS1.